Hey guys, so 4.2's beta just released and there's actually so many things to go over. Now, because there's 4 Novaflares and 3 new units, I've decided to make 2 separate videos so this one doesn't end up being super long. So today I just want to give a general rundown of all the Novaflares and give my initial analysis. Now, to start off the video, on the screen will be my initial thoughts on how impactful I believe the buffs were to our units. The chart is based on if I believe the changes addressed their flaws or made them extremely strong. And as you can see, I think they overall did a pretty good job, though I would like to see a bit more for Huohuo and Seele, which you'll later understand why. Now, starting with Welt, I first want to look at his damage. The skill now gets 2 more bounces, which adds 144 more motion value, which is a lot relatively speaking, but 360% total is still pretty low. After that, we have his talent, where every time Welt hits a slowed enemy, he's dealing 100 additional attack damage. Now, on paper, it doesn't seem like much, going from 60 to 100, but when you add the 2 extra bounces, that's literally 500% motion value. So combining this and his skill, that's already 23% more than Anox's double skill. But that's not all. When we add in his new Trace 2, which replaces 10 energy per ult, every Welt skill now can do up to 980% attack, which is an entire archer ult. From that scaling alone, it makes him a solid main DPS candidate. But it's actually the other stuff that makes him completely broken. His supportive capabilities are now very competitive. His talent now applies 40% defense shred to enemies in the waitlist state. It's not currently known what that means, but I'm assuming that when the talent procs or perhaps when they're just slowed. Now, we combine that with his buffed Trace 1, which is now 35% vulnerability, and all of a sudden, you got buffs comparable to Cypher, Trippy, and Jiao Cho. Yeah, this guy was tier 5 right before this, by the way. Moving to his ult, the delay function now has been adjusted from a flat 40% delay to now 12%. But every time an enemy gets hit, they're now delayed for 4% AV. Now, it's effectively the same thing, but because of the wording, enemies cannot avoid the second part of the delay, unlike the original hit. His Trace 3 was changed, which now basically gives you a 1-to-1 conversion with effect hit rate to attack percent, and his attack percent traces were also subsequently changed to be made effect hit rate, which I'll talk about later. To finish off with Welt, his E1 adds even more multipliers, which is really insane. I believe it's a 40% damage increase for his ult, and it'll be a bit less for his skill, which is a bit RNG dependent as it's once per enemy hit. His E4, which used to increase his skill slow chance, now gives 90 CV, which makes it one of the best E4s in the game, I believe. Now, his E6, which used to be 1 extra skill hit, is now 30% res shred, which for most teams is a 30% final damage increase. So for those who kept losing the Welt and have him at E7, you guys are eating super good. So with all that, Welt now has tier 0.5 levels of AMP and the scalings of a tier 0 DPS. However, the reason why I believe he's going to be a top tier DPS is because he's a nihility unit. Yeah, you've heard me right. Now, I've been working on my Acheron video for the past week, which I'm not going to spoil, but basically, because Welt provides a lot of shred and has extremely high multipliers, that means he's lacking stat amps. And you know who has the best stat amps? Harmony units, like Sunday and Sparkle. Welt at the moment has basically 0 diminishing returns because of his nihility kit. So that means he is able to fully utilize Sparkle and Sunday. So a 60% amp for someone like Anoxa ends up being like 100% if not more for Welt. Yeah, it's that crazy. Now, I know some Acheron mains were wondering, does Welt save Acheron? And I'm sorry to say, but he's not saving her. He has great damage and great amps and is a bit stronger than Cypher and Jiao Cho, but it's still not enough to save her. Like I said, I got a dedicated Acheron video coming soon, and just know she has some brutal issues. Now, while Welt is basically Thanos now, he does have one pretty big caveat at the moment. He needs to proc his talent on slowed enemies. Now his ult should guarantee a slow on the enemy. However, in multi-wave content, he doesn't have that luxury, so he'll have to rely on his skill, which has a 75% hit chance. You need 122 effect hit rate to land every time, which is a pain to get. Unironically, effect hit rate is likely the way to go, giving us a total of 71% base effect hit rate. And that's unironically pretty solid because if you do want to go carry Welt, then the top supports right now give crit rate and crit damage. So if you do end up going this route, just make sure to focus on crit rate for your substats. But moving on to the next unit, we got Seele, our first limited 5-star. Seele got very simple changes. Her skill now does 64% more damage, and her ult does 69.5% more damage. Now, the skill's 360% multiplier is actually kinda weak, but if enemies are under 50% HP, we now get a free skill cast when allies hit them. And with this change, it functions very similar to Anox's double skill, which also has similar scalings. But now there's also this stipulation. Honestly, I do think it's pretty cool and fits her playstyle, but I am a bit worried on how it'll play out as the enemies do need to be less than 50% HP. As for the ult, it's actually really good scaling per energy and is the best for the Hunt DPSs, I believe. But Hunt generally doesn't have the highest ult scaling, so do take that with a grain of salt. After that, she got a lot of self buffs. Her talent's damage bonus lasts longer, and her useless Trace 1 finally does something. We get up to 150% stacking damage bonus if she gets a kill, stacking up to 3 times. Trace 2 also gives her 5 more respen. Now, to put in perspective how good this is, we can just compare to Anox's self buffs, which serves as a good baseline. Now, when converting the stats to crit damage, we can see that Seele, at max damage bonus stacks, does have much more self amp than Anoxa. However, if Seele can't get a kill, it is significantly less than Anoxa. With all that said, I believe she's overall just decent now. Her self buffs widely vary and that matters a lot. We're either a good bit more or a lot less than someone like Anoxa. Now, multiplier wise, she again is just decent and is dependent on the scenario. There's still 2 issues that haven't been addressed yet, which I do like to see though. Firstly, perhaps make Trace 1 permanent stats for the fight. Running out of damage bonus after a few turns is just not that good, especially on an older unit like Seele. And secondly, her Trace 3 is still useless. Besides that, I'd say she's just pretty decent. Next up is Huohuo. Looking at her skill and talent, both have received healing buffs, with the talent being the more impactful one here. As you can see, we're now getting an extra heal instance and also healing anyone below 50% HP when an ally acts. As such, for total healing, Huohuo got a very major buff in this department. Not to mention how her talent is now much easier to achieve and also maintain as it lasts 3 turns. The other utility change would be her Trace 1, where she now gains 30 energy at the start of battle. Now sadly, it doesn't cross any breakpoints with it, but it's still pretty nice. Trace 2 helps Huohuo amp a bit more for high energy cost teams, which is super nice. Lastly, we have E1, which at the moment, many people believe this is a typo as 100% speed is ridiculous for an E1. And as people have mentioned, it's likely 20% speed, so 8% more for your current team, and 100% healing bonus. Now that healing bonus is actually a metric poop ton. And assuming you had around 40% prior to this, it's legit increasing your healing output by 70%. So yeah, if you want that extra sustain, this E1 is a really solid choice. As for my thoughts, she really needed help with sustain, and with the changes, she gets a lot more healing. There's also quality of life stuff there too, which is pretty nice. Now, there's only one issue I'd like to point out. Huohuo really needed help against one-shots, as every older sustain actually does, because enemies nowadays just hit way too hard. Because attack skillers have around 3k HP and 800 defense, they're super prone to getting 2-shot, especially a team like Dot. So while Huohuo will currently prevent you from dying from chip damage, you still can't avoid 1 or 2 shots. Perhaps they'll add something in her kit in the future to prevent this, but regardless, she's still going to be a tier 0 unit from the utility alone. Now, I saw some people talking about how her attack percent buff being 2 turns is an issue, but personally I think it's actually just fine, as if it were permanent, she'd just be Danheng PT that also gives energy, which sounds kind of OP. Lastly, there's Firefly, who also got very simple changes, which were clearly directed to you if you didn't have Dahlia. However, if you do, they're just really solid buffs. Firstly, her skills implant now applies to all 3 targets instead of 1. If you're matching, then it's a 0% damage increase. However, if you weren't matching and brute forcing instead, that additional toughness from the adjacent enemies actually results in a flat 33% damage increase, which is pretty nuts. Now, even if you do have Dahlia, there's plenty of situations where Dahlia's ult isn't up, such as a boss switching phases or in multi-wave content. Overall, a fantastic change. Next, there's Trace 2, which gives us 25% break effect, which is whatever. But now, Firefly can delay her combustion state. It's generally a buff and really good for players who don't have Dahlia. However, if you do, it actually can be a nerf, as sometimes people would play around the fact that you left her enhanced state to maybe get in one more skill. It's pretty minor, but just something to note. Moving on to her biggest buff, we now got Trace 3. Firefly now gets 100% more super break multipliers with even easier to hit requirements. Now on the screen, I'm gonna put up the damage gain depending on how much super break you already had. Personally, for me, it's just a 27% damage increase, but for others, it can range anywhere from 27 to 59%, which for just one change is a crazy buff. Lastly, they've also buffed her E2, and instead of it refreshing on every other turn, it's now every single turn if Firefly can break or kill. Damage-wise, assuming you can permanently trigger it, that's a 33% damage increase right there. With this change going from E1 to E2, it in theory can be up to a 100% damage increase as you get double the turns, making her E2 one of the strongest in the entire game. And yeah, that's Firefly right there. At the moment, she is literally perfect and doesn't need anything else. It's pretty apparent the changes were targeted towards people without Dahlia, but regardless, everyone still benefits. And yeah, that's all for the Novaflares. In terms of performance, here's my other chart. This is where I believe they'd fall under Pridewind's tier list. On the bottom in tier 1.5, we got Seele. Seele got very nice changes, but I just don't think it's enough for the current meta. In my opinion, it's probably gonna end up as a Blade or Jingliu situation if they don't give further buffs. In tier 0.5 though, that's sub DPS or support well. Him giving 35 vulnerability and 40 defense shred already makes him a top tier Nihility Amper, putting him roughly around Tree or Cypher levels in terms of amp. It's good, but no crazy mechanics like the other tier 0 units. As for tier 0 though, we got main DPS Welt. As mentioned earlier, he has a fantastic stat distribution and is great as a hypercarry driver. His only weakness is the effect hit rate and his talent. But besides that, he'll likely be one of the strongest DPSs in the game. And of course, we got Huohuo and Firefly, both who are in the 0.5 tier already. With these changes, it'll easily push him up to tier 0. Of the units, once again, more Seele or Huohuo buffs would be pretty nice, but we'll just have to wait and see. And yeah, that's the whole video. I'm actually super satisfied with the Novaflares this time around, even if it wasn't for the most deserving of units. Now, as for my Elation units video, by the time this video is released, I will be working on that one. Hopefully it'll come out in around 12 hours or so, and I'll do my best to make it happen. But if you want my initial impressions, Silverwolf SP is very strong, and Evanesia is probably getting a rework or buff. Her kit right now is a mess to say the least, and that's all I'm gonna say for now. Hopefully this video helps you out, and I'll see you in my next one. Peace.